The shove came without warning. Hard. Deliberate. The kind of physical contact designed not just to move someone, but to dominate them. To establish hierarchy in the most primal way possible. It landed square between her shoulder blades, a broad palm and thick fingers driving forward with enough force to send most people stumbling into the metal serving counter. The kind of shove that came from someone who had never faced real consequences for putting his hands on another person. But the woman didn't stumble. She didn't cry out. She didn't gasp. She didn't even turn around immediately. Her feet shifted. Just 2 inches. Maybe 3. A subtle redistribution of weight that happened so fast, so instinctively, that only someone trained to observe such things would have noticed it at all. The plastic tray in her hands remained perfectly level. Not a single ice cube in her water glass shifted position. The small salad she'd selected didn't slide even a centimeter across the smooth surface. She simply absorbed the impact, neutralized it, continued standing exactly where she had been standing, as if the laws of physics had briefly decided to make an exception just for her. And that was the first sign that something was very, very wrong. The Camp Morrison dining facility was crowded that Tuesday afternoon. October sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting long rectangles of gold across the polished floor. The smell of institutional food hung in the air. Meatloaf. Green beans from a can. Coffee that had been sitting on the burner for at least 3 hours. Hundreds of Marines moved through the space with the casual efficiency of people who had done this same routine 1,000 times before. Trays clattered. Conversations hummed at a low murmur. Chairs scraped against linoleum as people settled into their seats or stood to leave. It was the most ordinary moment imaginable. Until it wasn't. The woman in question had been standing in the middle of the lunch line, waiting her turn like everyone else. She wore civilian clothes, a charcoal gray athletic pullover, slightly damp with sweat. Practical khaki cargo pants, the kind you'd wear for a long run or a morning hike. Well-worn trail shoes that had clearly seen hundreds of miles of use. Her hair was dark auburn, threaded with early silver at the temples, pulled back in a simple braid that hung between her shoulder blades. Her skin carried the flush of recent exertion, someone who had been pushing themselves physically in the cool autumn air. She wore no visible insignia, no rank, no badges, no indication whatsoever that she was anything other than what she appeared to be. A civilian, probably a spouse, maybe a contractor. Someone who had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. At least, that's what Staff Sergeant Riley Thornton assumed when he spotted her. Thornton was impossible to miss. 6'2", 220 pounds of muscle wrapped in desert camouflage. His head was shaved to regulation perfection. His sleeves were rolled with obsessive precision, displaying forearms marked with a fading eagle, globe, and anchor tattoo. He moved through the dining facility like he owned it. Because in his mind, he did. 8 years in the Corps. 2 deployment cycles, though neither had seen actual combat. A chest full of ribbons that looked impressive to civilians but told a different story to anyone who knew how to read them. Training exercises, marksmanship badges. The kind of decorations you accumulated by showing up and doing the minimum. But Thornton had something more valuable than combat experience. He had presence. He had size. He had the kind of swagger that made junior Marines scatter when he walked into a room, and he had 2 lance corporals flanking him like loyal dogs, Tyler Bennett and Jake Webb. Both barely old enough to drink legally. Both eager to please their senior NCO. Both conditioned through months of observation to laugh at Thornton's jokes, echo his opinions, and watch with barely concealed excitement whenever he decided to put someone in their place. They'd seen him do this before. The testing, the dominance displays, the casual cruelty disguised as maintaining standards. It was always the same. Thornton would identify someone who looked vulnerable, someone who seemed like they didn't belong, and then he would establish, publicly and unmistakably, exactly who held power in that moment. Today, he had chosen the woman in the gray pullover. "You don't belong in this line, lady." The words came out sharp, deliberate, pitched loud enough that nearby Marines turned their heads to look. Thornton stepped closer after the shove, expecting to see fear, expecting to see the woman stumbling, off balance, turning around with wide eyes and a stammered apology already forming on her lips. Instead, she simply stood there, perfectly still, perfectly balanced, holding her tray like nothing had happened. When she finally turned to look at him, her expression was impossible to read. Blue eyes, clear and sharp, with the peculiar intensity of someone who had seen difficult things and processed them long ago. There was no fear in those eyes, no anger either, no defensiveness. What was there was something that might have been patience, or possibly disappointment, but certainly not intimidation. "Excuse me?" Her voice was low, quiet in a way that made people lean in to listen, rather than strain to hear. There was no tremor in it, no uncertainty. It was the kind of voice that came from someone accustomed to being heard, without having to raise their volume. Thornton blinked. This wasn't how people responded to him. This wasn't how anyone responded to him. "I said, you don't belong here." His voice rose, compensating for his confusion with volume. "This is a chow hall for Marines, not for civilians who wander in off the street looking for a free meal." He stepped even closer, invading her personal space in that deliberate way that bullies learn to use as a weapon. Close enough that she could smell the gun oil and sweat clinging to his uniform, the acrid scent of someone who had spent the morning on the range and hadn't bothered to clean up before lunch. The sign outside says, "All hands welcome until 1300 hours." She said it simply, matter-of-factly, without any particular emphasis on any word. "It is currently 12:47. I am entitled to be here." The dining facility went quieter, not silent. There was still the background noise of utensils against trays and low conversation, but quieter. Several Marines at nearby tables paused mid-bite, sensing that something was shifting in the dynamic. Thornton laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound that echoed off the metal serving counters. "Did you hear that?" He looked back at Bennett and Webb with exaggerated disbelief. "She's quoting policy at me. She thinks a piece of paper is going to change how this works." The two lance corporals laughed on cue. Nervous sounds that suggested they weren't entirely comfortable, but knew better than to show it. Thornton turned back to the woman, his chest puffing out, his body language designed to dominate. "Listen here, lady. I don't know who your husband is. I don't know if he's a warrant officer or a captain or some contractor who thinks his paycheck makes him important. Honestly, I don't care." He gestured around the dining facility, taking in the space as if it were his personal kingdom. "I've been out on that range since dawn. My Marines are hungry. We've been working. Actually working. While you've apparently been, what, out for a morning jog?" He looked her up and down, his lip curling with obvious disdain. "This line is for the working party, for people who contribute, not for dependas who think they can waltz in here and act like they own the place." The word hung in the air. Dependa. Military slang. Short for dependopotamus. A cruel term used to describe military spouses who were seen as taking advantage of their partner's service. It was designed to wound, designed to reduce, designed to make clear exactly where he believed she stood in the hierarchy. The woman's expression didn't change. She didn't flinch at the insult, didn't show anger or hurt, just continued looking at him with those steady blue eyes. And something about that steadiness made Thornton even angrier. 25 years earlier, in a different country, on a different continent, a young woman had learned what it meant to remain calm under pressure. Kosovo, March 1999. The convoy had been moving along a mountain road north of Pristina when the first RPG streaked out of the tree line. It struck the lead vehicle with a sound like the world ending. Metal screaming, glass shattering. The concussive wave hitting everyone within 50 meters like a physical blow. Second Lieutenant Victoria Blackwood was 22 years old. She had been in country for exactly 11 days. Her uniform still looked new. Her boots hadn't fully broken in yet. She had graduated from officer candidate school 8 months earlier, finishing third in her class. Riding high on the confidence of someone who had never been truly tested. That confidence evaporated in the first 3 seconds of the ambush. The second RPG hit the vehicle directly behind hers. She felt the heat of it through the window, saw the fireball bloom in her peripheral vision, heard the screams of Marines who had been laughing at a crude joke just moments before. For one terrible instant, she froze. Her hands locked on the steering wheel. Her mind went completely blank. Every lesson she had ever learned, every tactical principle she had memorized, every scenario she had practiced in training, all of it vanished like smoke in a hurricane. She was going to die on this mountain road. They were all going to die, and there was nothing she could do about it. Then a voice cut through the chaos. "Lieutenant, we need covering fire on the left flank, now! Sergeant Tommy Hartwell, 31 years old, 3 combat deployments. The kind of NCO who made officers look good by quietly doing their jobs for them while they figured out how to lead." His voice broke through her paralysis like a bucket of ice water. She moved. Later, they would call it heroism. They would write citations that used words like gallantry and extraordinary courage and unhesitating devotion to duty. They would pin medals on her chest and shake her hand and tell her that she had saved 12 lives that day. But Victoria knew the truth. Tommy Hartwell had saved her, had pulled her out of her freeze response with nothing but the sound of his voice and the weight of expectation in his eyes, had given her a direction to move when her own mind had betrayed her. She had led the counterattack because he had shown her where to go. She had suppressed the enemy position because he had positioned himself to draw their fire. She had gotten her people out of the kill zone because he had made it possible. And when the extraction helicopter finally arrived, when the dust was settling and the survivors were being loaded aboard, Tommy Hartwell wasn't with them. He had taken 3 rounds to the chest while providing covering fire for the withdrawal. He had died with his rifle still pointed at the tree line, still fighting, still protecting the people he had sworn to protect. Victoria had held his hand during those final minutes, had watched the light fade from his eyes while the medic worked frantically and uselessly to stop the bleeding. "I knew you had it in you, LT." Those were his last words, whispered through lips already going pale. "You just needed someone to show you." She had worn his memorial bracelet every single day since. Black metal, worn smooth from 25 years of constant contact with her skin. His name and the date of his death engraved on the inner surface, where only she could read it. A reminder, a promise, a debt that could never fully be repaid. The memory flickered through Victoria Blackwood's mind as she stood in the Camp Morrison dining facility, facing down a staff sergeant who had no idea who he was dealing with. She looked at Riley Thornton and saw something that made her chest tighten with a complicated emotion. She saw herself, not as she was now. Not as the 47-year-old brigadier general who had spent a quarter-century earning every promotion, every commendation, every ounce of respect that came her way. She saw herself as she had been in the year after Kosovo, young, decorated, convinced that her combat experience made her special, made her better than the people around her who hadn't been tested the same way. She had been insufferable. She had worn her medals like a shield, had used her status as a combat veteran to justify treating others with barely concealed contempt, had confused the fear and deference of junior personnel with genuine respect. She had been becoming exactly the kind of leader who destroyed units from the inside out, the kind who confused rank with power and authority with dominance. If left unchecked, she would have burned out or washed out within a decade. Another promising officer who couldn't get out of her own way. But someone had intervened. Someone had seen what she was becoming and decided to do something about it. Master Sergeant Walter Briggs had pulled her aside one evening outside the barracks at Fort Campbell. No witnesses, no official channels, just a squared-away NCO and a junior officer who needed to hear some hard truths. "Lieutenant, I'm going to say something to you that you're not going to want to hear." She had bristled immediately, had felt the familiar armor of her ego rising to deflect whatever criticism was coming. "You saved 12 lives in Kosovo. That's good. That matters. But if you keep acting like it makes you better than everyone else, you're going to destroy more than you saved." She had opened her mouth to argue, to defend herself, to explain that he didn't understand what she had been through. Briggs hadn't let her. "I know what you went through. I've been through worse, 3 times, and I'm telling you right now that the person you're becoming is going to fail every single Marine who ever serves under her." His eyes had been hard, uncompromising, but there was something else in them too, something that looked almost like concern. Those bars on your collar don't give you the right to treat people however you want. They give you the obligation to protect them. The moment you forget that, the moment you start thinking your commission makes you superior, that's the moment you become the enemy. He had paused, letting those words sink in. You have a choice to make. You can keep going the way you're going, and you'll flame out within 5 years. Or you can remember what Tommy Hartwell died for. He didn't give his life so you could become a bully with a commission. The words had hit her like a physical blow, because he was right. Because she knew he was right. Because somewhere underneath all the armor she had built, the real Victoria Blackwood was still there, still grieving, still trying to make sense of why she had lived when Tommy hadn't. That conversation had changed everything. It had taken months, years, really. The slow, painful work of dismantling her ego and rebuilding herself into someone worthy of the sacrifice that had been made for her. But she had done it, and Walter Briggs had been there every step of the way, mentoring her, challenging her, refusing to let her backslide into old patterns. Now, 25 years later, she looked at Staff Sergeant Riley Thornton and recognized the symptoms, the arrogance, the cruelty disguised as standards, the desperate need to feel powerful by making others feel small. He was broken in the same way she had been broken. The question was whether he could be fixed. So here's how this is going to work. Thornton's voice cut through her reverie. He had apparently been talking this entire time, building up steam, feeding off the attention of the growing audience. You're going to step aside. You're going to wait until my Marines are finished eating. And then, if there's anything left, maybe you can grab something. You understand me?" Victoria Blackwood remained exactly where she was. She didn't step aside, didn't nod, didn't show any indication that she had heard him at all. The silence stretched. 1 second. 2. 3. Thornton's face began to flush. The vein in his temple started to pulse. "Did you hear me?" His voice rose higher. "I said, move." Still nothing. Just those calm blue eyes watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Around them, the dining facility had gone noticeably quieter. Conversations had died away. Forks had stopped moving. Marines at nearby tables were watching openly now, their meals forgotten. Something was wrong. Everyone could feel it. The dynamic had shifted in some fundamental way that nobody could quite articulate. The woman in the gray pullover wasn't acting like a civilian who had accidentally wandered into hostile territory. She wasn't acting like someone who was scared, or intimidated, or uncertain of her position. She was acting like someone who was waiting. For what? Nobody knew. Okay. Thornton's voice dropped into something lower, more dangerous. "I tried to be reasonable. I tried to give you a chance to walk away with your dignity intact. But clearly you don't understand how things work around here." He stepped even closer, so close that their faces were barely a foot apart. "Let me explain it to you in terms you might understand. This is the United States Marine Corps. We have standards here. We have discipline. We have a chain of command. And you, lady, are at the bottom of that chain. Below private. Below recruit. Below the person who mops these floors." He jabbed a finger toward the exit. "You are nothing here. Less than nothing. And if you don't remove yourself from this facility in the next 30 seconds, I will have you removed. Is that clear?" Victoria Blackwood took a slow breath. It was the first visible response she had shown since the confrontation began. Just a simple expansion of her chest, a measured intake of air, as if she was preparing to do something that required calm and focus. When she spoke, her voice was exactly as quiet as it had been before. But something had changed in its quality. "You should check my wrist, Sergeant." Thornton blinked. "What?" "My right wrist." She raised her arm slightly, rotating it so the black metal bracelet was visible. "This is a KIA memorial bracelet. Do you know what that means?" He stared at it, confusion flickering across his face. "It means I lost someone. Someone who mattered. Someone who died believing I would become worthy of his sacrifice." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, there was something sharp in them. Something that made Thornton take an involuntary half-step backward. "I have spent 25 years trying to live up to that belief. 25 years of service. 25 years of learning what leadership actually means. And I have learned many things in that time." She paused, letting the silence build. "But the most important thing I learned is this. The measure of a leader is not how they treat the people above them. It's how they treat the people they perceive to be below them." The dining facility was completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped moving, spatulas frozen in mid-flip, their attention fixed on the confrontation at the serving line. "You just showed me exactly who you are, Sergeant Thornton." His eyes widened slightly at the use of his name. He hadn't introduced himself. She had read his name tape without him noticing. "You showed me that you use your rank as a weapon against people you think can't fight back. You showed me that you confuse intimidation with respect. You showed me that you have never learned the difference between authority and power." Her voice dropped even lower. "And you showed me that you have never been tested. Not really. Not in any way that matters. because someone who has truly been tested does not need to prove their dominance by shoving strangers in a lunch line. Thornton's face had gone from red to purple. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. The vein in his temple was now visibly throbbing. "That's it." His voice came out strangled. "That's it. I don't know who you think you are, but you just made a very big mistake." He reached for the radio on his belt. "I'm calling the MPs right now. You're trespassing on a military installation. You're disrupting military operations. You're interfering with the readiness of my Marines. And when they get here, they're going to escort you out in handcuffs, and your name is going to go on a report, and your family is going to find out about your little incident. And stop talking." 2 words, spoken quietly, but with an authority that seemed to freeze the air itself. Thornton's hand stopped moving. His mouth hung open. His entire body went rigid, as if he had just received an electric shock. Victoria Blackwood's posture had shifted. It was subtle. Her shoulders drew back slightly. Her spine straightened an additional inch. Her chin lifted to an angle that somehow transformed her entire presence. She wasn't the same person who had been standing there moments before. Or rather, she was. But the mask had slipped. The pretense of ordinariness had fallen away, revealing something underneath that made every instinct in Thornton's body scream at him to pay attention. "You have the ability to read, Sergeant." Her voice had dropped an octave. It had taken on a quality that seemed to vibrate through the entire dining facility, cutting through the silence like a blade through silk. "That sign outside says, 'All hands welcome.' That's a direct quote from Base Regulation 1234.7, subsection C, which clearly states that all personnel assigned to or visiting the installation are welcome to utilize dining facilities during posted hours." She took 1 step toward him. Just one. But it was enough to make him take another half-step back. "It doesn't say all Marines, it says all hands. That includes civilian contractors, spouses, visiting personnel, and," she paused, "general officers conducting informal assessment of base operations." There was a collective intake of breath across the dining facility. Several Marines' eyes widened. A private near the beverage station nearly dropped his tray. The 2 lance corporals behind Thornton exchanged a glance of pure terror. Thornton's face went white. "So either you don't know your own base regulations," Victoria Blackwood continued, her voice still perfectly calm, perfectly controlled, "or you're choosing to ignore them. Neither option reflects well on your leadership." She held his gaze. Didn't blink. Didn't waver. "The question you need to ask yourself right now, Sergeant, is this. How much worse do you want to make this for yourself?" Thornton's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. His hand was still frozen near his radio. His body was still rigid. His mind was clearly struggling to process what he was hearing, trying to reconcile the woman in the sweat-dampened gray pullover with the implications of her words. He started. His voice cracked. "I didn't." But he couldn't finish the sentence. Because somewhere deep in his gut, in that primal place where instinct lives, he was beginning to understand that everything he thought he knew about this situation was wrong. And the ground beneath his feet was about to give way entirely. At a table near the beverage dispensers, Lance Corporal Derek Westbrook had stopped breathing. His turkey sandwich sat forgotten on his tray. His eyes were fixed on the confrontation at the serving line with the intensity of someone watching a building collapse in slow motion. He knew. He had figured it out about 30 seconds before the woman had started talking about regulations and general officers, had put the pieces together in a flash of recognition that had sent ice water flooding through his veins. The briefing. 3 days ago. the orientation meeting for all junior enlisted personnel, the PowerPoint presentation about the unit's history and the installation's mission and the new command structure. He had barely paid attention. Most of the Marines in the room had been checking their watches, waiting for it to end. But there had been one slide that stuck in his memory. One photograph that he had looked at for just a moment before his attention wandered elsewhere. A woman in dress blues, auburn hair with silver at the temples, a chest full of medals and ribbons, stars on her collar. Brigadier General Victoria Blackwood, the new Deputy Commanding General for the entire installation, 25 years of service, combat veteran, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, one of the highest-ranking female officers in the entire Marine Corps. And she was standing at the serving line in civilian clothes, while Staff Sergeant Riley Thornton committed what could only be described as career suicide. Holy smoke! Westbrook breathed the words without realizing he was speaking out loud. His buddy, Corporal Nathan Fisher, looked at him with confusion. What is it? But Westbrook was already moving, already pushing back from the table, already heading for the exit, with the desperate urgency of someone who had just witnessed a crime and needed to report it before things got any worse. He burst through the double doors of the dining facility into the bright afternoon sunlight. The autumn air was cool against his face, but his hands were already shaking. He fumbled for his cell phone. His fingers were trembling so badly that he had to make 3 attempts before he got the number right. Battalion Staff Duty. Sergeant Morrison speaking. Sergeant, this is Lance Corporal Westbrook, Charlie Company. Westbrook spoke rapidly, his words tumbling over each other. You need to get the Command Sergeant Major down to the dining facility immediately. Right now. No delay. Slow down, Westbrook. What's going on? It's bad, Sergeant. Staff Sergeant Thornton from Charlie Company is currently in a confrontation with a woman in the chow line. He's been aggressive. He's been threatening. He shoved her, called her names. And Sergeant, I'm pretty sure the woman is General Blackwood. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Say again, Lance Corporal. General Blackwood. Brigadier General Victoria Blackwood. The new Deputy Commanding General. I saw her picture in the briefing 3 days ago. The memorial bracelet on her wrist matches. Sergeant, you need to get people here now. Another pause, then the sound of a chair scraping violently against the floor. Hold on. Morrison's voice was tight with controlled urgency. I'm pulling up her schedule. Just a minute. The sound of rapid typing came through the phone. According to this, General Blackwood was conducting a personal fitness assessment on the perimeter trail this morning. There's a notation that she was planning to grab lunch at the main dining facility afterward. That would have been approximately 12:45 hours. So it's her, Westbrook said. I'm not crazy. Stand by. Morrison's professional composure was cracking. I'm alerting the commanding officer and the command sergeant major immediately. Stay on the line and keep your eyes on the situation. Do not interfere. Just observe and report. Copy that, Sergeant. Westbrook held the phone to his ear and turned back to look through the glass doors of the dining facility. Inside, Thornton was still at the serving line. His face was purple with rage. His radio was in his hand. The woman in the gray pullover was still perfectly motionless, waiting. And somewhere in the base, the chain of command was mobilizing. Everything was about to change. Back inside the dining facility, Staff Sergeant Riley Thornton was reaching for his radio when Victoria Blackwood made her move. She didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't make any dramatic gesture. She simply reached into the pocket of her cargo pants and withdrew something small, a leather bifold, the kind that military personnel use to carry their identification and credentials. She flipped it open and held it up angled so that Thornton could see it clearly. The military ID card, the photograph that matched her face exactly, the rank insignia printed in bold letters, BG Victoria A. Blackwood, and below that, the words that made Thornton's legs actually buckle. Deputy Commanding General. The color drained from his face so quickly that for a moment he looked like he might actually faint. His hand dropped away from his radio. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish pulled from water. Behind him, Lance Corporal Bennett made a small sound, something between a whimper and a gasp. Webb had gone completely pale, his eyes wide with the dawning horror of someone who realized they had been complicit in something catastrophic. The dining facility remained frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if time itself had stopped to witness the moment of Thornton's complete and total destruction. Victoria Blackwood returned the identification to her pocket with the same calm efficiency with which she had produced it. "So," she said quietly, "do you still want to call the military police, Sergeant? I'm sure they'd be very interested to hear your account of events." Thornton couldn't respond. His body had stopped obeying his commands. His voice had abandoned him. His mind was still trying to process the magnitude of what he had done, the sheer scope of the disaster he had created for himself. He had shoved a general officer. He had called a general officer a dependa. He had threatened to have a general officer removed from a dining facility in handcuffs. And he had done all of it in front of dozens of witnesses. His career wasn't just over. It was destroyed, annihilated, reduced to ash, and scattered to the wind. There would be no coming back from this. I thought not. Victoria Blackwood's voice was still quiet, still controlled, but there was something else in it now, something that sounded almost like sadness. She looked at Thornton for a long moment, looked at the fear in his eyes, the trembling of his hands, the complete collapse of the arrogance that had defined him just minutes before. And she saw, beneath all of it, something that made her pause. She saw a young man who was broken, who had built his entire identity around dominance because he had never learned any other way to feel powerful, who was about to have his life destroyed, and who probably didn't even understand why. She saw herself 25 years ago, before Walter Briggs had pulled her aside and changed everything. The question was whether this young man could be saved the same way she had been saved, or whether he was already too far gone. The doors of the dining facility burst open. Lieutenant Colonel David Callahan came through first, moving with the controlled urgency of an officer who had just received catastrophic news. Behind him came Command Sergeant Major Walter Briggs, his weathered face set in an expression that suggested he had already assessed the situation and found it severely wanting. 3 more officers followed, a major, 2 captains, all of them looking like they had just run from wherever they had been when the call came in. The chain reaction that Lance Corporal Westbrook had set in motion had cascaded through the command structure with terrifying speed, from the battalion staff duty line to the commanding officer's aide to the installation deputy commander's office. Within minutes, every senior leader on base had been alerted. A staff sergeant had just assaulted the deputy commanding general, in public, in front of witnesses, and the entire command structure had mobilized to respond. Attention on deck. Walter Briggs's voice thundered through the dining facility with the force of an artillery strike. It was the kind of voice that had been forged through 3 decades of military service, through combat and crisis, and countless moments when lives depended on being heard clearly and obeyed immediately. Every Marine in the room snapped to attention instantly. Chairs scraped, bodies straightened, eyes fixed forward. Only Victoria Blackwood remained as she had been, calm, still, watching. Lieutenant Colonel Callahan approached her with the careful deference of a man walking on sacred ground. His face was pale. His hands were clasped behind his back in a white-knuckled grip. General Blackwood. His voice was tight, with barely controlled emotion. We sincerely apologize for what has occurred here today. This situation is completely unacceptable. I take full responsibility for. She raised a hand slightly, a small gesture that somehow stopped him mid-sentence. Colonel, her voice was quiet, but carried easily through the silent room. We will discuss this matter in your office. But first, I believe Sergeant Major Briggs has some things to address. She looked at Briggs. Their eyes met. And in that exchange, there was an entire conversation that nobody else in the room could hear. 25 years of friendship. 25 years of mutual respect. 25 years of shared history that had begun with a hard conversation outside a barracks at Fort Campbell. He understood immediately. She wasn't asking for retribution. She was asking for something else entirely. Staff Sergeant Thornton. Briggs's voice was ice. Pure, crystalline ice that seemed to drop the temperature of the entire room by 10 degrees. You are relieved of your duties. Effective immediately. You will report to my office at 0900 hours tomorrow morning. You will prepare a written statement detailing everything that transpired here today. He stepped closer to Thornton, who was visibly shaking now. And you will understand that your career in the United States Marine Corps is currently balanced on the edge of a knife. One wrong move, one wrong word, and you will fall. Thornton's mouth moved. General, I didn't. I swear I didn't know. Briggs's expression didn't change. That is not an excuse, Sergeant. That is an explanation of how you failed. Leadership means treating everyone with respect, not just the people who can hurt your career. He turned to the two lance corporals, who looked like they wanted to sink through the floor and disappear entirely. You two. Bennett. Webb. Names, units, and chain of command. Written statements on my desk by 1600 hours, and count yourselves lucky that you were witnesses rather than active participants. Both lance corporals nodded frantically, unable to speak. Briggs turned back to address the entire dining facility. All of you are now witnesses to a significant incident. You will be contacted for statements within 48 hours. But more importantly, I want every single one of you to understand what you saw here today. His voice rose, filling the space. What you witnessed is conduct unbecoming of a United States Marine. What you witnessed is the abuse of rank and authority. What you witnessed is exactly what we do not stand for in this institution. He paused, letting that sink in. The woman who Staff Sergeant Thornton assaulted is Brigadier General Victoria Blackwood, Deputy Commanding General of this installation. Combat veteran. 25 years of honorable service. Another pause. She came here in civilian clothes to see how our Marines behave when they think no one important is watching. And what she found was a non-commissioned officer who believes that his stripes give him the right to abuse that authority. He looked directly at Thornton. This is what happens when leadership forgets what it means to lead. This is what we get when someone confuses rank with power. Remember this moment, all of you. Remember what you saw. And ask yourselves whether you want to be the kind of leader who builds people up, or the kind who tears them down. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria Blackwood turned and began walking toward the exit, Lieutenant Colonel Callahan falling into step beside her. She didn't look back at Thornton. didn't spare him another glance. But as she passed Command Sergeant Major Briggs, she paused, just for a moment. Walter. Her voice was quiet enough that only he could hear. "We need to talk. After the debrief." He nodded. The same conversation. He said softly, "Different kid." Something flickered in her eyes. Something that might have been hope, or might have been sadness, or might have been both. "Let's find out if this one can be saved." Then she continued walking, out through the doors, into the bright October sunlight. And behind her, Staff Sergeant Riley Thornton stood in the ruins of everything he had ever built, surrounded by the eyes of every Marine in the room. Facing a future that had just become terrifyingly uncertain. He had no idea that the woman he had shoved was about to decide his fate, and he had no idea that her decision would not be what anyone expected. 48 hours had passed since the incident in the dining facility. The base had not stopped talking about it. The story had spread through every barracks, every office, every corner of Camp Morrison like wildfire. Staff Sergeant Thornton, who shoved a general. Staff Sergeant Thornton, who called the Deputy Commanding General a dependa. Staff Sergeant Thornton, whose career was over before he even knew it had begun to end. The details grew more elaborate with each retelling. Some versions had Thornton throwing a punch. Others claimed he had cursed at her for 5 minutes straight. A few creative souls insisted that General Blackwood had personally thrown him to the ground using some kind of special forces combat technique. The truth was dramatic enough without embellishment. But the truth wasn't what people wanted. They wanted spectacle. They wanted justice. They wanted to see a bully finally get what he deserved. And they were about to get something far more complicated. Victoria Blackwood stood at the window of Lieutenant Colonel Callahan's office, looking out across the base. The October sun had climbed higher now, burning off the morning chill, casting sharp shadows across the parade ground below. She could see Marines moving between buildings, going about their duties, unaware of the decision she was about to make. Unaware that the ripples from that moment in the dining facility were about to spread in directions nobody expected. Her right hand moved to her left wrist, to Tommy's bracelet. Her fingers found the familiar grooves, the name she had traced 10,000 times before. "What would you think of me now, Tommy?" She asked the question silently. The same question she had asked 1,000 times over the years, in moments of doubt, in moments of triumph, in moments when she needed to remember why she did what she did. The door behind her opened. "General." Callahan's voice was tight, controlled. The voice of an officer who was still processing the magnitude of what had happened in his dining facility. "The investigation is complete. We're ready for your review." She turned from the window, nodded once. Then she walked to his desk to review the evidence that would determine Riley Thornton's fate. The file was thick. 47 witness statements, photographs of the dining facility layout, a timeline reconstructed from multiple sources, audio recordings of witness testimonies, transcribed and annotated. Victoria read through it methodically, page by page, statement by statement. The picture that emerged was damning. Thornton had initiated contact. Thornton had used derogatory language. Thornton had physically grabbed her arm. Thornton had threatened to have her arrested. Thornton had done all of this in full view of dozens of Marines who had watched with varying degrees of discomfort and complicity. There was no defense, no mitigating circumstances, no angle that could make this look like anything other than what it was. Career-ending misconduct. She closed the file and looked at Callahan. "Tell me about him." "Ma'am?" "Thornton. His service record. His background. Tell me who he is beyond this incident." There was a moment of silence as Callahan processed the request. It wasn't what he had expected. He had prepared himself for anger, for demands that Thornton be court-martialed immediately, for the kind of righteous fury that most officers would display after being physically assaulted by an enlisted Marine. Instead, she was asking questions. "He's been with us for 18 months, Callahan said slowly, reaching for a personnel file that his aide had prepared. Transferred from Camp Lejeune. 8 years of service. 2 deployment cycles, both to training support operations. No combat experience." He opened the file, scanning the pages. His evaluations have been mixed. Above average marks for physical fitness and technical proficiency. Below average marks for interpersonal skills and leadership development. There have been complaints from junior Marines about his management style? What kind of complaints? Callahan hesitated. Allegations of bullying, ma'am. Intimidation. Using his rank to humiliate subordinates. Nothing formal. Nothing that rose to the level of official action. But there have been whispers, patterns, and his command. How did they respond to these whispers? The silence that followed was answer enough. Callahan's jaw tightened. We counseled him, verbally. His company commander spoke with him about maintaining professional relationships. But there was no documentation, no formal counseling statement, no corrective action plan. So he was allowed to continue. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. And the weight of it seemed to press down on Callahan's shoulders. Yes, ma'am. He was allowed to continue. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Processing. Evaluating. The picture was becoming clearer now. Riley Thornton wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom, a product of a system that had failed to correct him at critical moments. A young NCO who had learned that his behavior had no consequences and had therefore continued to escalate. Until today, when the consequences had finally arrived, all at once, in the form of a general officer in a gray pullover. What about his family background? Callahan looked surprised by the question. Ma'am? His family? Where did he come from? What was his upbringing like? The colonel flipped through the personnel file, searching for information that wasn't typically considered relevant to disciplinary proceedings. Father was career military, Marine Corps, 22 years before retirement. Mother was a homemaker. Thornton enlisted right out of high school. No college, no other career attempts. He paused at a page. There's a notation here from his initial psychological screening. Something about a difficult relationship with his father. Strict upbringing. High expectations. Victoria nodded slowly. The pattern was becoming clearer. Where is Sergeant Major Briggs? He's in the conference room, ma'am, coordinating with the legal office on potential charges. I need to speak with him. Privately. The colonel nodded, though his expression suggested he was still struggling to understand where this was going. Of course, ma'am. She rose from her chair and paused at the door. Colonel Callahan, one more thing. Ma'am, when the formal proceedings begin, I want you to remember something. A leader's job is not to destroy people who make mistakes. A leader's job is to determine whether those mistakes can be corrected. And if they can, to do the correcting. She held his gaze for a moment. Staff Sergeant Thornton is broken. The question is whether he can be fixed. That's what we're going to find out. Then she was gone, leaving Callahan staring at the empty doorway with an expression of complete confusion. He had expected rage. He had expected punishment. He had not expected whatever this was. The conference room was small and windowless. A single table dominated the space, surrounded by metal chairs. A whiteboard covered one wall, still bearing the dry erase notes from some previous meeting. Command Sergeant Major Walter Briggs sat alone at the far end of the table. His campaign cover rested on the surface beside him. His hands were folded in front of him, his posture perfect, despite his 57 years. He didn't turn when the door opened. Didn't need to. He had known she was coming before her footsteps reached the hallway. 25 years of friendship taught you to recognize certain things. Victoria, her first name, not her rank, not her title. The familiarity of decades compressed into 2 syllables. Walter. She closed the door behind her and moved to the chair beside him. Not across the table. Beside him. The way they had always sat during the difficult conversations. He looked old today. She noticed it suddenly. The deep lines around his eyes. The gray that had fully conquered his hair. The slight stoop in his shoulders that hadn't been there even 5 years ago. 32 years of service had taken their toll. 3 combat deployments, countless crises, the accumulated weight of responsibility for thousands of young Marines who had passed through his care. But his eyes were still sharp, still clear, still capable of seeing through all the noise to find the truth underneath. You're not going to destroy him. It wasn't a question. He knew her too well for questions. No. Why? She was quiet for a moment, searching for words that would capture something she had felt in that dining facility, something that had crystallized in the moment when Thornton's world came crashing down around him. Because he reminded me of someone. Briggs nodded slowly. I know. Do you remember Fort Campbell? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with memory, heavy with meaning. Every day. His voice was quiet now, almost soft. I remember thinking you were going to wash out within 2 years. All that potential, all that courage. And you were going to throw it away because you couldn't get your ego under control. Victoria felt something tighten in her chest. You saved my career. No. He turned to look at her directly. I gave you a choice. You saved your own career. All I did was show you the door. You're the one who walked through it. She was silent for a long moment, processing, remembering. The conversation outside the barracks. The words that had cut through her armor like nothing else had. The painful, humiliating process of acknowledging that she had become exactly the kind of officer she had sworn never to become. Tommy didn't die so I could become a bully with a commission. The words came out rough, raw. Even after 25 years, the memory still had edges that could draw blood. No, Briggs agreed. He didn't. She looked at her mentor, her friend, the man who had pulled her back from the edge when she was about to go over. I want to try the same thing with Thornton. Briggs didn't respond immediately. His expression remained neutral, but she could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. The assessment, the evaluation. He's worse than you were, he said finally. I know. You were arrogant, but you weren't cruel. You never enjoyed hurting people. He does. I know. And you had combat experience. You had been tested. You knew what real pressure felt like. Thornton has never faced anything harder than a physical fitness test. I know. Briggs leaned back in his chair. So why do you think he can be saved? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer, more uncertain. Because I saw his face when he realized who I was. I saw the fear, the shame, the complete collapse of everything he thought he knew about himself. She paused, and underneath all of that, I saw something else. I saw a young man who has no idea why he acts the way he acts, who has never been taught any other way to feel powerful, who is going to have his life destroyed, and who doesn't even understand what he did wrong. She looked at Briggs. That's not someone who's evil, Walter. That's someone who's broken. And broken people can be fixed. You proved that with me. Briggs was silent for a long time. The conference room seemed to grow smaller around them. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a phone rang and went unanswered. "What are you proposing?" Victoria took a breath. "I want to handle his discipline personally. I want him reduced in rank. I want him assigned to the dining facility where the incident occurred. And I want 6 months of mandatory mentorship." She paused. "With me?" Briggs's eyebrows rose slightly. "You want to mentor the man who shoved you in public and called you a dependa?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because that's what you did for me. And if I don't pass that forward, then everything you invested in me was wasted." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning, heavy with memory. Briggs was quiet for another long moment. Then, slowly, a small smile cracked the weathered surface of his face. "Tommy would be proud of you." Victoria felt her throat tighten. "I hope so. Every day. I hope so." Briggs nodded. Then his expression shifted back to professional mode. "All right, let's discuss the logistics. If we're going to save this kid, we need to do it right. That means formal charges first. A disciplinary hearing. Witnesses. Documentation. Everything by the book." His eyes met hers. "And then, after all of that, we offer him the choice. The same choice I offered you. Become someone better. Or be destroyed." "Exactly. And if he chooses destruction, then we let him fall. Some people can't be saved, Walter. I know that. But we don't know which category Thornton falls into until we give him the opportunity to decide." Briggs was silent for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew something. A coin. Old. Worn. The emblem of the Marine Corps on one side. A unit designation and date on the other. Victoria recognized it immediately. She had seen it 100 times over the years. Briggs's commander's coin, from his first deployment. The only physical possession from his career that he still carried with him everywhere. "If this works," Briggs said slowly, "if you actually manage to turn this kid around, then, at the end of it, I want to give him this." He held up the coin, not because he earned it, but because you earned it. Everything I invested in you, every conversation, every hard truth, it all led to this moment. To you making the same choice I made 25 years ago. He set the coin on the table between them. "That's what this is really about, Victoria. Not saving one broken staff sergeant. It's about proving that the work matters, that the investment pays forward. That one act of mentorship can ripple outward for decades." Victoria looked at the coin, at the man who had carried it for 30-plus years, at the weight of meaning that passed between them in that small, windowless room. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail." Briggs shrugged slightly. "But at least you tried. At least you gave him a chance. That's more than most people get." She reached out and touched the coin, felt the smooth metal, worn down by years of handling. "Okay." She pulled her hand back. "Let's go save Riley Thornton." The disciplinary hearing took place on Friday morning. The conference room adjacent to battalion headquarters had been transformed for the occasion. A long table at one end for the presiding officers, a single chair in the middle for the accused, seats along the walls for the witnesses and legal representatives. Lieutenant Colonel Callahan sat at the center of the presiding table, Command Sergeant Major Briggs to his right, a senior officer from the installation's command staff to his left, and at the far end, in dress uniform with stars on her collar, sat Brigadier General Victoria Blackwood. Staff Sergeant Riley Thornton entered the room looking like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. Because he hadn't. He had spent those 72 hours in a state of suspended animation, confined to quarters, stripped of his duties, forbidden from contacting anyone outside his immediate chain of command. He had written his statement, had sat for hours staring at the blank paper before finally putting pen to paper and describing, in excruciating detail, exactly what he had done and why. I saw a woman in civilian clothes in the chow line. I assumed she was a military spouse or contractor. I decided to assert my authority over her because I believed she had no right to be there. The words looked even worse on paper than they had sounded in his head. He had called his mother once, the only call he was allowed. She had cried. He hadn't known what to say. Now he stood at attention in the center of the room, wearing his dress uniform, facing the people who would decide his fate. The staff judge advocate read the charges. Assault on a federal officer. Abuse of rank and authority. Conduct unbecoming of a Marine. Violation of base regulations. Insubordination. Each charge was documented with specific evidence. Each charge was supported by witness testimony. Each charge carried the weight of institutional authority and military law. The defense was perfunctory. Captain Morrison, assigned to represent Thornton's interests, had reviewed the evidence and given his client a realistic assessment. "There's no defense here, Sergeant. The best we can do is throw ourselves on the mercy of the command." Thornton had nodded. He had known that already. When the opportunity came for Thornton to speak on his own behalf, he stood slowly. His legs felt unsteady. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "I have no defense." He swallowed hard. "What I did was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I was doing it, and I did it anyway because I thought my rank gave me the right." He forced himself to look at General Blackwood, to meet her eyes for the first time since the dining facility. "General, I am sorry. I know that word doesn't mean anything. I know it doesn't undo what I did, but I want you to know that I am sorry." He felt tears threatening to break through, fought them back. "Not because I got caught, because I hurt someone, because I used my position to hurt someone who hadn't done anything wrong, and because I did it in front of junior Marines, which means I taught them that hurting people is what leadership looks like." His voice cracked. "I was wrong. I was completely wrong. And I don't know how to fix that." He sat down. The room was silent. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The weight of his confession seemed to fill the space, pressing down on everyone present. Then Brigadier General Victoria Blackwood rose from her seat. Staff Sergeant Thornton. Her voice was calm, measured, utterly controlled. "Look at me." He raised his eyes, met hers. What he saw there surprised him. He had expected anger, expected contempt, expected the cold satisfaction of someone about to deliver a killing blow. Instead, he saw something else entirely. He saw recognition. "You want to know why I didn't stop you immediately in that dining facility?" The question caught him off guard. "Ma'am? I could have shown you my identification the moment you first spoke to me. I could have ended the confrontation before it escalated. I could have saved you from yourself with 2 words." She paused. "But I didn't. I let it continue. I let you dig yourself deeper and deeper. And now you're standing here facing charges that could end your career." Her eyes held his. "Do you want to know why?" Thornton nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. "Because I needed to see how far you would go. I needed to understand what kind of person you really are. Whether you were just having a bad day, or whether that cruelty was part of your fundamental character." She moved around the table, walking slowly toward where he sat. "And I learned something, Sergeant. I learned that you have no idea why you act the way you act. You have no understanding of where your cruelty comes from or what it's doing to the people around you." She stopped directly in front of him. "You're not evil, Staff Sergeant Thornton. You're broken. There's a difference." The words hit him like a physical blow. Broken. He had never thought of himself that way. Had never considered that his behavior might be a symptom of something deeper. Something wounded. Something that needed repair. 25 years ago, I was just like you. General Blackwood's voice had changed. Softer now, more personal. I was arrogant. I was cruel. I used my rank to dominate people because I had never learned any other way to feel powerful. I was on a path that would have destroyed me and everyone who served under me. She glanced at Command Sergeant Major Briggs. But someone intervened. Someone saw what I was becoming and decided to do something about it. Someone pulled me aside and told me hard truths that I didn't want to hear, but desperately needed to understand. Her eyes returned to Thornton. That person saved my career. More importantly, that person saved my soul. And I have spent the last 25 years trying to be worthy of that investment. She was quiet for a moment. Now I am going to offer you the same choice that was offered to me. Thornton felt his breath catch. You will be reduced in rank, from Staff Sergeant to Sergeant. Effective immediately. That reduction is permanent. You will have to earn your way back through the competitive promotion process like everyone else. She paused. You will be reassigned to the dining facility where this incident occurred. You will work there for 6 months. You will learn what it means to serve others rather than dominate them. Another pause. And you will participate in a structured mentorship program. 1 hour every Friday for 6 months. Her eyes met his. With me. The room went completely silent. Callahan's mouth actually dropped open slightly. Captain Morrison looked like he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. And Thornton himself felt the world tilt beneath his feet. With you? His voice came out strangled. Yes. But why? Because someone did the same for me. And if I don't pass that forward, then everything that person invested in me was wasted. She straightened, her bearing shifting back to formal. This is your choice, Sergeant Thornton. You can accept this offer and begin the long, difficult work of becoming someone better. Or you can reject it, in which case the full weight of military justice will come down on you, and your career will end today. She held his gaze. I'm not offering you mercy. Mercy would be letting you off easy. I'm offering you something much harder. I'm offering you the chance to earn your way back. The room waited. Thornton's mind was racing, trying to process what he had just heard, trying to understand why this woman, this general officer, this person he had publicly humiliated and physically assaulted, was offering him anything at all other than destruction. It didn't make sense. It didn't follow any logic he understood. Why would you do this for me? The question came out before he could stop it. General Blackwood was quiet for a moment. Because someone did it for me. Because I believe that broken people can be fixed. Because I made a promise to a man who died 25 years ago that I would become worthy of his sacrifice. Her voice dropped. And part of being worthy is giving others the same chance I was given. Thornton stared at her, at the stars on her collar, at the ribbons on her chest, at the woman who had every reason to destroy him and was instead offering him something he didn't deserve. Redemption. Not freely given, not easily obtained, but possible. within reach, if he was willing to do the work. He thought about his Marines, about the example he had set, about the lessons he had taught them through his cruelty and his arrogance and his abuse of power. He thought about who he had been in that dining facility. The swagger, the contempt, the absolute certainty that he had the right to treat people however he wanted. He thought about the look on General Blackwood's face when she had finally shown him her identification. The calm, the patience, the complete absence of the rage he would have shown if their positions had been reversed. And he made his choice. I accept. His voice was rough, thick with emotion. I accept your offer, General. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll work in the dining facility. I'll attend the mentorship sessions. I'll earn my way back. He paused. I don't deserve this chance. I know that. But I'm going to prove that you made the right decision. I'm going to prove that I can be better. General Blackwood nodded once. Good. She turned to Lieutenant Colonel Callahan. Colonel, please ensure that the appropriate orders are issued. Sergeant Thornton will report to the dining facility, Senior Enlisted Advisor at 0600 hours tomorrow morning. Yes, ma'am. Command Sergeant Major Briggs. Ma'am, I'll need your assistance in structuring the mentorship program. We'll discuss the details this afternoon. Of course, ma'am. She looked back at Thornton one final time. Sergeant, this is the beginning, not the end. The next 6 months will be the hardest of your life. There will be moments when you want to quit. Moments when you think you can't do it. Moments when the shame feels too heavy to carry. Her eyes held his. In those moments, remember this. I didn't give you this chance because I think you're special. I gave you this chance because I believe that everyone deserves the opportunity to become better than they are. What you do with that opportunity is entirely up to you. She turned and walked toward the door. Don't waste it. Then she was gone, leaving behind a room full of officers who were still trying to process what they had just witnessed, and a young sergeant who had just been offered something he had never expected. A second chance. The question now was whether he would take it. Outside the conference room, in the hallway that led to the building's main exit, Lance Corporal Derek Westbrook stood waiting. He had been summoned to provide additional testimony if needed, had spent the last hour sitting on a hard bench, wondering what was happening behind those closed doors. When General Blackwood emerged, he snapped to attention. She paused when she saw him. At ease, Lance Corporal. He relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained fixed on her with something that looked like curiosity mixed with respect. You're the one who made the call. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. I recognized you from the briefing. I thought someone should know what was happening. Victoria studied him for a moment, saw the intelligence in his eyes, the courage it had taken for a junior Marine to report a senior NCO. What's your name? Westbrook, ma'am. Derek Westbrook. How long have you been in Westbrook? 3 years, ma'am. She nodded slowly. You did the right thing, reporting what you saw. It took courage to make that call. Most people in your position would have stayed silent. Westbrook hesitated for a moment, then spoke. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Granted. I've watched Sergeant Thornton for months. Watched him bully junior Marines. Watched him use his rank like a weapon. And I've always wondered why nobody ever stopped him. He paused. When I saw him doing it to you, I finally had the chance to do something about it. I couldn't let it continue. Victoria looked at the young Lance Corporal, saw the moral clarity in his eyes, the willingness to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. This was exactly the kind of Marine the Corps needed more of. Westbrook. What happened in that dining facility and what happens next, I want you to pay attention. I want you to watch how this unfolds, because someday you're going to be in a leadership position. And you're going to face situations where you have to decide whether to destroy someone or try to save them. She held his gaze. When that day comes, remember what you saw here. Remember that there's more than one way to respond to failure. And remember that the choice you make will define what kind of leader you become. Westbrook nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am, I'll remember. Good. She turned to continue down the hallway, then paused. And Westbrook, keep making the hard calls. The Corps needs people who are willing to do what's right, even when it's not easy. Then she was gone, walking out into the October sunlight, leaving behind a young Marine who would carry that conversation with him for the rest of his career. And in the conference room behind her, Riley Thornton was just beginning to understand the magnitude of the journey that lay ahead. The dining facility was dark when Riley Thornton arrived at 05:45 the next morning, 15 minutes early. He had barely slept, had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling of his quarters, replaying the events of the past 72 hours in an endless loop. The shove. The words. The moment when General Blackwood had shown him her identification and his entire world had collapsed. And then, impossibly, the offer. He still didn't understand it. Couldn't make sense of why someone he had publicly humiliated would choose to save him rather than destroy him. The logic didn't track. The math didn't add up. But here he was, standing outside the same building where he had committed career suicide 4 days ago. Wearing the chevrons of a sergeant instead of a staff sergeant, waiting for someone to tell him what to do next. The door opened. A figure emerged from the darkness inside, stocky, weathered, gray hair cropped close to his skull. The kind of face that had seen everything the Marine Corps had to offer, and had stopped being surprised by any of it decades ago. Gunnery Sergeant Martin Flores, Senior Enlisted Advisor for the dining facility. 30 years of service. The kind of NCO who had forgotten more about leadership than most people would ever learn. You Thornton? Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. Flores looked him up and down. His expression revealed nothing. You're early. Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. Good. Flores turned and walked back into the building without another word. Thornton followed. The interior of the dining facility looked different in the pre-dawn darkness. Without the bustle of Marines moving through the serving line, without the clatter of trays and the murmur of conversation, it felt almost sacred, a space waiting to be filled with purpose. Flores led him through the main dining area into the kitchen, the industrial ovens, the massive refrigerators, the prep stations where food for hundreds of Marines was assembled 3 times a day. This is where you're going to work, Flores said, stopping in the center of the kitchen. Not out there in the dining area where you can swagger around and pretend you're important. Back here, where the real work happens. He pointed to a station in the corner, a deep sink, a rack of dirty pots and pans, a scrub brush, and a bottle of industrial cleaner. You start at the dishwashing station. Everything flows through here. Every pot, every pan, every utensil, every tray. You're going to learn what it takes to keep this operation running from the ground up. Thornton looked at the station, at the mountain of dirty cookware that had accumulated overnight. Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. Flores studied him for a long moment. I know what you did, he said quietly. Everyone knows what you did. The story's been through every barracks on this base by now. Staff Sergeant Thornton, who shoved a general and called her names. Thornton felt his face flush with shame. But General Blackwood asked me to give you a chance. And I've known that woman for 15 years, served with her in Afghanistan, watched her lead under fire. If she says you're worth saving, then I'm going to take her word for it." He stepped closer, his eyes hard. "But understand this, Sergeant. You don't get special treatment here. You don't get sympathy. You don't get to skip steps because you used to be a staff sergeant. You earn your way back one dish at a time, one pot at a time, one day at a time." His voice dropped. "And if I ever see you treat any of my Marines the way you treated that woman in the chow line, I will personally ensure that your career ends. General Blackwood's mercy or not. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, Gunnery Sergeant." Flores nodded. "Good. Now get to work. Those pots aren't going to wash themselves." Thornton moved to the dishwashing station, rolled up his sleeves, picked up the scrub brush, and began the long, slow process of rebuilding himself from the ground up. The first week was physical torture. Thornton's hands, which had been relatively soft despite his years of service, developed blisters within the first 2 days. The harsh industrial cleaners ate at his skin. The hot water turned his fingers raw and red. His back ached from hours of standing at the sink. His shoulders burned from the repetitive motion of scrubbing. His feet throbbed from the concrete floor. But he didn't complain. Not once. He arrived early every morning, stayed late every evening, did whatever Gunnery Sergeant Flores told him to do without question or hesitation. And slowly, something began to shift. It started with the junior Marines who worked in the facility. They had heard the stories, knew who he was, knew what he had done. Most of them had expected him to be bitter, resentful. The kind of NCO who blamed everyone else for his problems and made life miserable for anyone within reach. Instead, they found something unexpected. A man who worked harder than anyone else in the kitchen, who never pulled rank, who asked questions about the operation instead of giving orders, who said please and thank you and treated the youngest private with the same respect he showed the gunnery sergeant. It was confusing, unsettling, not at all what they had anticipated. Private First Class Maria Donovan was the first to approach him directly. She was 19 years old, 3 months out of boot camp, assigned to the dining facility because she had scored low on her technical aptitude tests, and the Corps hadn't known what else to do with her. She found Thornton at the dishwashing station during his second week. Her tray was loaded with dirty pots from the breakfast rush. "Sergeant?" Her voice was hesitant, uncertain. Thornton looked up from the sink. His hands were raw. His uniform was splashed with soapy water. But his expression was open, patient. "What do you need, Private?" She hesitated. "I wanted to ask you something." "Go ahead. Why are you here?" The question hung in the air between them. Thornton was quiet for a moment. Then he set down his scrub brush and turned to face her fully. "You know what I did." "Everyone knows," she admitted. "Then you know why I'm here." "I'm here because I made a terrible mistake. I treated someone badly because I thought my rank gave me the right. And I was wrong." He paused. "I'm here because someone gave me a chance to be better than I was. And I'm trying not to waste that chance." Donovan studied him for a long moment, her young face showing the kind of careful evaluation that came from learning early not to trust authority figures. "Is it working?" "I don't know yet," Thornton admitted. "Ask me again in 6 months." She nodded slowly. Then she set her tray of dirty pots on the counter beside the sink. "I'll help you," she said. "My shift doesn't start for another 20 minutes." Thornton felt something shift in his chest. Something that might have been hope. "Thank you, Private. I appreciate that." They worked side by side in silence, scrubbing pots, rinsing pans, 2 Marines from opposite ends of the rank structure, finding common ground in the simple act of working together. It was a small moment, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but it was a beginning. Friday arrived like a summons from on high. Thornton had been dreading it all week, the first mentorship session with General Blackwood, 1 hour in which he would have to sit across from the woman he had assaulted and somehow find words to explain how he was going to become a different person. He reported to her office at 1400 hours exactly. Uniform pressed, boots polished, every regulation met to the letter. The aide showed him in. General Blackwood's office was larger than Lieutenant Colonel Callahan's. Windows looked out over the parade ground, photographs lined the walls, unit citations, combat deployments, a career captured in images that spanned a quarter century. She was seated behind her desk when he entered, still in uniform, still wearing the stars that represented everything he had tried to diminish, with his words and his actions. "Sit down, Sergeant." Her voice was neutral, professional, giving nothing away. Thornton sat in the chair across from her desk. His hands were folded in his lap. His spine was straight. His eyes were fixed on a point just above her left shoulder. "Look at me." He forced himself to meet her gaze. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to establish some ground rules for these sessions. First, what happens in this room stays in this room. These conversations are not part of your official record. They're not being documented. They're not going to be used against you." She paused. "Second, I expect honesty. Complete honesty. If you lie to me, even once, these sessions end, and so does your chance at redemption. I'm not interested in the version of yourself you think I want to see. I'm interested in who you actually are." Thornton nodded. "Understood, General." "Good." She leaned back in her chair. "Now, tell me about your father." The question caught him completely off guard. "My father?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment, trying to understand where this was going, trying to decide how much to reveal. He was career military, Marine Corps, served 22 years before he retired. And what kind of man was he? Thornton felt something twist in his stomach, a familiar knot of emotion that he had spent years trying to ignore. He started, then stopped. He was difficult. In what way? The knot tightened. He had expectations, high expectations, for himself, for my mother, for me. And when we didn't meet those expectations, he trailed off. What happened when you didn't meet them? Thornton was silent for a long time. The memories were there, buried deep. The sound of his father's voice raised in anger. The weight of disappointment that hung over the house like a permanent fog. The lessons learned early about what happened to people who showed weakness. He was hard. Thornton finally said he believed that strength was everything, that showing weakness was the worst thing a person could do, that the world was divided into people who dominated and people who got dominated. He paused. He wasn't physically abusive, but he had a way of making you feel small, of making you feel like nothing you did would ever be good enough. Every mistake was a failure of character. Every sign of emotion was weakness that needed to be crushed. General Blackwood listened without interrupting. Her expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes suggested she was hearing more than just words. "And what did you learn from him?" Thornton's jaw tightened. "I learned that rank matters, that authority matters, that the person with the most stripes gets to decide what's true and what isn't." He forced himself to continue. "I learned that if you're not the one on top, you're the one getting stepped on. And I swore that I would never be the one getting stepped on again. And so you became the one doing the stepping." Yes. The word came out rough, heavy with the weight of recognition. "I became exactly like him." I used my rank the same way he used his. I made people feel small because it made me feel big. I called it maintaining standards, called it discipline, called it leadership. His voice cracked, but it wasn't any of those things. It was just cruelty. The same cruelty he showed me, passed on to everyone who was unlucky enough to serve under me. General Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. "Do you understand why I'm asking you about this?" Thornton shook his head. "Because you can't fix a problem until you understand where it comes from," she said. "You weren't born cruel, Sergeant. You were made cruel. By a father who taught you that dominance was the only way to survive. By a system that rewarded aggression and overlooked abuse. By years of learning that the only way to feel powerful was to make others feel powerless." She leaned forward. "That's not an excuse. What you did is still wrong. What you became is still your responsibility. But understanding where it came from is the first step toward becoming something different." Thornton felt tears threatening to break through. Fought them back. "How do I become something different?" "One choice at a time," General Blackwood said. "Every day, you're going to face situations where you have the option to be cruel or to be kind, to dominate or to serve, to make someone feel small or to help them feel capable." Her eyes held his. "For the next 6 months, I'm going to help you recognize those moments, and I'm going to help you make different choices than the ones your father taught you to make." She paused. "It won't be easy. It won't be fast. There will be days when you fail. Days when you slip back into old patterns. Days when it feels impossible to be anyone other than who you've always been." Her voice softened slightly. "But it is possible. I know because I did it. Because someone did for me exactly what I'm trying to do for you." Thornton looked at her, at the stars on her collar, at the woman who had every reason to destroy him and had chosen to save him instead. "Why do you care?" he asked. "Why does it matter to you whether I change or not?" General Blackwood was quiet for a moment. "Because of this." She raised her right wrist. The memorial bracelet caught the light. "Tommy Hartwell," she said. "He was my sergeant in Kosovo. 25 years ago. He died protecting me during an ambush. Took 3 rounds to the chest while providing covering fire so the rest of us could get out." Her voice dropped. "His last words to me were that he knew I had it in me, that I just needed someone to show me. And I have spent every day since then trying to be worthy of that belief." She looked at Thornton. "When I look at you, I see someone who has the potential to be worthy of something too. You just need someone to show you how. That's why I care. That's why it matters." Thornton stared at her, at the bracelet on her wrist, at the weight of memory and loss that she carried every single day, at the 25 years of choices that had followed that sacrifice. And he understood, finally, what she was offering him. Not just a second chance at his career, a second chance at his life. "I won't waste it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I promise you, General, I won't waste it." She nodded. "Good. Then let's get to work." The months that followed were the hardest of Riley Thornton's life. Every Friday at 1400 hours, he sat in General Blackwood's office and submitted himself to the difficult work of excavating his own soul. They talked about his father, about his childhood, about the moments when he had first learned to use cruelty as a shield against his own feelings of inadequacy. They talked about the Marines he had bullied over the years, the junior enlisted personnel whose confidence he had destroyed, the peers whose careers he had undermined, the trail of damage that stretched back through 8 years of service. They talked about leadership, about the difference between authority and power, about what it meant to serve rather than to dominate. And slowly, painfully, Thornton began to change. It showed first in small ways. In the dining facility, he started noticing things he had never noticed before. The young private who always seemed tired because she was working 2 jobs to send money home to her family. The lance corporal who struggled with reading and was too ashamed to ask for help. The cook who had been passed over for promotion 3 times and had stopped believing it would ever happen. He started talking to them, not as a superior issuing orders, but as a fellow human being trying to understand their lives. He started helping, not because anyone told him to, not because he was trying to earn points or improve his evaluation, but because he had finally begun to understand that leadership meant lifting others up rather than pushing them down. Gunnery Sergeant Flores noticed the change. "You're different," he said one morning, 3 months into Thornton's assignment. "Don't know exactly what General Blackwood is doing in those sessions, but something's working." Thornton looked up from the prep station where he was helping prepare vegetables for lunch. "I'm trying, Gunnery Sergeant." Flores nodded. "I know you are. That's what's different. You're actually trying." He paused. "You know, when they first told me you were coming here, I expected the worst. Expected you to be bitter, resentful. The kind of guy who makes everyone around him miserable because he's miserable himself." He shook his head. "But that's not what I got. I got someone who shows up early, works hard, treats my Marines with respect. Someone who's actually interested in learning instead of just going through the motions." His eyes met Thornton's. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Because the person I see now is someone I'd be proud to serve alongside." Thornton felt something warm spread through his chest. "Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant. That means more than you know." The 4th month brought a test. A young private named Marcus Jackson had made a mistake, a significant one. He had loaded the wrong supplies onto a delivery truck, causing a cascade of problems that affected meal service for an entire day. The old Thornton would have destroyed him. Would have screamed, would have made him feel small and worthless and afraid. The new Thornton did something different. He pulled Jackson aside, away from the other Marines, away from the public eye. "What happened?" Jackson was trembling. His eyes were red. He had clearly been expecting the worst. "I messed up, Sergeant. I read the manifest wrong. I loaded the wrong pallets. I screwed everything up, and now everyone's going to know how stupid I am." Thornton looked at him, at the fear in his eyes, at the shame that was already eating him alive. And he saw himself, 20 years ago, standing in front of his father after making a mistake, waiting for the hammer to fall. "You made a mistake," Thornton said quietly. "Everyone makes mistakes. The question is what you do next." Jackson blinked, confused. "Sergeant, here's what's going to happen." Thornton said, "You and I are going to figure out how to fix this. We're going to work together to minimize the damage. And then we're going to talk about what you can do differently next time so it doesn't happen again." He paused. "What we're not going to do is stand here while I make you feel like garbage. That's not going to help anyone. It's not going to fix the problem. And it's not going to make you a better Marine." Jackson stared at him. "But everyone says," he started. "Everyone says what? That you used to be." Thornton nodded. "I used to be someone who would have torn you apart for a mistake like this. You're right. But I'm trying to be someone different now, someone better. And that means treating you the way I wish someone had treated me when I was in your position." He put a hand on Jackson's shoulder. "Now, let's go fix this together, okay?" Jackson nodded slowly. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by something else, something that looked like hope. "Yes, Sergeant. Let's fix it." They worked together for the next 4 hours, sorting supplies, redirecting shipments, coordinating with other facilities to cover the gaps. By the end of the day, the crisis had been resolved, and Jackson had learned something that would stay with him for the rest of his career. That leaders could be kind, that mistakes didn't have to be the end of the world, that someone with authority could use that authority to help rather than to hurt. The 5th month brought another test, this one more personal. Jake Webb found Thornton in the kitchen one afternoon. Webb, one of the 2 lance corporals who had flanked Thornton that day in the dining facility. One of the young Marines who had laughed on cue when their senior NCO was humiliating a woman they didn't know was a general. Thornton hadn't seen him since the incident, had heard that Webb had stayed on base while Tyler Bennett had requested a transfer, unable to face the daily reminder of his complicity. Now, Webb stood in the doorway of the kitchen, looking uncertain, uncomfortable, like a man who had been carrying something heavy for months and had finally decided to set it down. "Sergeant, can I talk to you?" Thornton set down the knife he had been using to chop vegetables. "Go ahead." Webb stepped into the kitchen. His eyes were fixed on the floor. "I wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For laughing. That day. When you were." Webb struggled to find the words. "When we were doing what we were doing to that woman. I knew it was wrong. I knew we shouldn't have been doing it. But I laughed anyway because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't." He finally looked up. His eyes were wet. "I've been thinking about it every day since. Wondering what kind of person I am. Wondering if I'm the kind of Marine who just goes along with whatever his superiors tell him to do, even when it's wrong." Thornton was quiet for a moment. "You were following my lead. That's not entirely your fault. That's mine. I was supposed to be setting an example, and I set the wrong one." He paused. "But you're here now. You're acknowledging it. That takes courage. More courage than I showed for the first 8 years of my career." Webb nodded slowly. "I want to be different. I don't want to be the kind of Marine who laughs when someone's being hurt. I don't want to be the kind of person who stays silent when something wrong is happening." "Then don't be," Thornton said simply. "Every day, you get to choose who you are. Make better choices than I did. Start now." Webb looked at him for a long moment. "How do you do it? How do you change?" Thornton thought about all the Friday sessions with General Blackwood, about the painful conversations, about the slow, difficult work of dismantling patterns that had been built over decades. "One choice at a time," he said finally. "Every day, you get moments where you can be cruel or kind, where you can go along with wrong or stand up for right. Start paying attention to those moments. Start making different choices." He picked up the knife and returned to his vegetables. "And find someone who will tell you the truth about yourself, even when you don't want to hear it. That's the most important thing. Find someone who cares enough to hold you accountable." Webb stood in silence for a moment longer. "Thank you, Sergeant." "Don't thank me," Thornton said without looking up. "Just be better than I was." Webb left, and Thornton continued chopping vegetables, thinking about ripples, about how one act of cruelty could spread outward and damage people you never even intended to hurt, and about how one act of redemption could do the same thing in reverse. The 6th month arrived faster than Thornton had expected. His final mentorship session with General Blackwood was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in April. Spring had come to California. The parade ground outside her office window was green with new growth. Thornton sat in the familiar chair across from her desk. His uniform was immaculate. His posture was perfect. But something was different about him now. The tension that had always lived in his shoulders was gone. The hardness in his eyes had softened. He looked like a man who had made peace with something that had been tormenting him for years. "So," General Blackwood said, "here we are." "Yes, ma'am, here we are." She studied him for a long moment. "Tell me what you've learned." Thornton took a breath. "I've learned that these chevrons on my collar don't give me the right to hurt people. They give me the obligation to protect them, to serve them, to help them become better than they were when I first took charge of them." He paused. "I've learned that cruelty is weakness disguised as strength, that making people feel small doesn't make you big. That the person I was in that dining facility 6 months ago was someone who had never learned how to feel powerful without hurting others." His voice dropped. "And I've learned that it's possible to change, that the patterns we learn in childhood don't have to define us forever, that with help, with guidance, with someone willing to invest in our development, we can become better than we were." He looked at her. "You taught me that, General. You and Sergeant Major Briggs, and Gunnery Sergeant Flores, and everyone else who decided to invest in me instead of throwing me away." General Blackwood was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "Do you remember what I told you in our first session? That I wasn't offering you mercy, I was offering you something harder? Yes, ma'am. You've proven me right. What you've done over the past 6 months is harder than anything you've ever done before. Harder than boot camp. Harder than any deployment. Harder than any physical challenge the Corps has ever thrown at you." She paused. "Because you've had to confront yourself. You've had to look at the parts of yourself that you spent years hiding. You've had to accept responsibility for the person you were and make the daily choice to become someone different." Her eyes met his. "That takes courage, Sergeant. Real courage. The kind that doesn't show up on any evaluation or earn any medals. But it's the most important kind there is." Thornton felt his throat tighten. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have," General Blackwood said. "I just showed you the door. You're the one who walked through it." She stood and moved to the window, looking out over the parade ground where Marines were conducting afternoon drills. "Your probation period ends today," she said. "Your conduct has been exemplary. Your performance evaluations have been outstanding. Command Sergeant Major Briggs has recommended that you be returned to regular duties with full privileges." She turned to face him. "But, more importantly, the Marines who worked with you in the dining facility have something to say about who you've become." She picked up a folder from her desk and opened it. "Private First Class Donovan wrote that you were the first NCO who ever treated her like her opinion mattered. Private Jackson wrote that you taught him that mistakes are opportunities to learn, not reasons to be afraid. Gunnery Sergeant Flores wrote that you're the kind of leader he wishes he had when he was coming up through the ranks." She closed the folder. "These aren't official evaluations, Sergeant. These are letters that people wrote because they wanted to. Because you made a difference in their lives." Thornton felt tears sliding down his cheeks. Didn't bother to wipe them away. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," General Blackwood said. "Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep making the choices that brought you to this moment. Keep being the person you've become." She moved back to her desk and picked up something else. A small wooden box. "Command Sergeant Major Briggs asked me to give you this." She handed him the box. Thornton opened it slowly. Inside, resting on a bed of black velvet, was a coin. Old. Worn. The emblem of the Marine Corps on one side, a unit designation and date on the other. "This is," he started. "His commander's coin." General Blackwood said. From his first deployment. He's carried it for over 30 years. It's the only physical possession from his career that he keeps with him at all times. She paused. He wanted you to have it. Not because you earned it in the traditional sense, but because your transformation proved something to him, something he's believed his whole career but doesn't often get to see in action. What's that? That the investment matters. That when we choose to save someone instead of destroy them, we're not just helping that one person. We're creating ripples that spread outward for years. Her voice dropped. 25 years ago, Walter Briggs invested in a young lieutenant who was on the verge of destroying herself. That lieutenant became a general officer, and that general officer invested in a staff sergeant who was on the same path. She looked at him. Now it's your turn, Sergeant. Someday, you're going to encounter a young Marine who is broken the same way you were broken. And you're going to have a choice. Destroy them or save them. Her eyes held his. When that moment comes, I expect you to remember this coin. Remember where it came from. Remember what it represents. And make the right choice. Thornton closed the box carefully, held it against his chest. I will, General, I promise. She nodded. I know you will. That's why we're having this conversation. 2 weeks later, Brigadier General Victoria Blackwood returned to the Camp Morrison dining facility. She came alone, in uniform this time, the stars on her collar visible for everyone to see. She walked through the main entrance and joined the lunch line like any other Marine, picked up a tray, moved along the serving counter. And there, working the main station, was Sergeant Riley Thornton. He saw her coming, had known she would come eventually, had been waiting for this moment without knowing exactly when it would arrive. Their eyes met. 6 months of history passed between them in that glance. The shove, the humiliation, the offer, the long, difficult journey from who he had been to who he was becoming. General Blackwood, he said. Sergeant Thornton, she replied. A moment of silence. What do you recommend today, Sergeant? Thornton looked at the food laid out before him. At the simple meal that represented everything he had learned about service and humility and leadership. The meatloaf is excellent today, ma'am. Made fresh this morning. The green beans are from a new supplier. Much better quality than what we used to get. He began loading her tray with careful attention. And if I may suggest, the apple pie for dessert is outstanding. One of our cooks has been experimenting with a new recipe. I think you'll enjoy it. General Blackwood watched him work, watched the care he took with each portion, the respect he showed for the food and for the person he was serving, the complete absence of the swagger and arrogance that had defined him 6 months ago. Thank you, Sergeant, she said. He handed her the tray. Thank you, General, for not giving up on me. She took the tray, held his gaze for a moment. Make sure you don't give up on yourself. Then she turned and walked toward a table near the window. At a table near the beverage dispensers, Lance Corporal Derek Westbrook sat with his lunch tray, watching the exchange between the general and the sergeant. 6 months ago, he had been the one to make the call, the one who had recognized General Blackwood and set the chain of events in motion. He had expected to feel satisfaction watching Thornton's downfall, expected to feel vindicated. Instead, he felt something unexpected. He felt hope. Because the man he was watching now, the sergeant who served food with humility and thanked a general for not giving up on him, was not the same man who had terrorized junior Marines for years. Something had changed. Something fundamental. Westbrook thought about his own career, about the choices he would face as he moved up through the ranks, about the kind of leader he wanted to become. He made a mental note to himself. Remember this. Remember that people can change. Remember that redemption is possible. Remember that the choice between destroying someone and saving them is one of the most important choices a leader can make. Then he picked up his fork and continued eating, carrying with him a lesson he would never forget. Riley Thornton watched General Blackwood walk away. His hand moved unconsciously to his pocket, to the wooden box that he carried with him everywhere now, the commander's coin that represented everything he had learned and everything he still had to become. He thought about his father, about the lessons he had learned as a child, about the person he had been in this very room 6 months ago. He thought about Tommy Hartwell, about a sergeant who had died believing that a young lieutenant could become something better, about the 25 years of choices that had followed that sacrifice. He thought about General Blackwood, about the woman who had seen something worth saving in a man who had given her every reason to walk away, about the weekly sessions that had excavated his soul and helped him rebuild it piece by piece. He thought about Jake Webb, who had found the courage to apologize and ask how to change, about Private Jackson, who had learned that mistakes didn't have to be the end of the world, about Private Donovan, who had discovered that not all NCOs were bullies. And he thought about the future, about the young Marines who would someday serve under him, about the moments when he would have the choice to destroy or to save, about the ripples that his choices would create, spreading outward through years and decades and generations. The line was moving again, more Marines coming through, more people to serve. Thornton straightened his uniform, adjusted his position at the station, and he got back to work. Because that's what leaders did. They served. Across the dining facility, General Victoria Blackwood sat alone at her table by the window. She ate her lunch slowly, watching the Marines move through the space, watching the young men and women who represented the future of the institution she had devoted her life to serving. Her right hand moved to her left wrist, to Tommy's bracelet. Her fingers found the familiar grooves, the name she had traced 10,000 times before. She had made a promise to him on a mountain road in Kosovo, a promise to become worthy of his sacrifice, a promise to honor his memory through the choices she made every single day. And today, watching Riley Thornton serve food to his fellow Marines with humility and care, she felt that she had kept that promise, not just for Tommy, for herself, for Walter Briggs, for every person who had invested in her development and believed in her potential, and now for Riley Thornton, for the young sergeant who had shoved her in a lunch line and called her names and threatened to have her arrested, who had been so broken that he couldn't see any way to feel powerful except by making others feel small, who had changed, who was still changing, who would carry that change forward into the future, passing it on to others the way it had been passed to him. That was the legacy, not the stars on her collar, not the ribbons on her chest, not the combat decorations or the command positions or the official records of her career. The legacy was the people, the young lieutenant she had been, saved by a master sergeant's hard truth, the young sergeant who had been saved by her hard truth, and all the people who would be saved in the future, as that chain of investment and redemption continued to grow. Victoria Blackwood finished her lunch. She stood, returned her tray to the collection point, nodded once to Gunnery Sergeant Flores, who nodded back with a small smile that said he understood exactly what had happened here today. Then she walked out of the dining facility into the California sunshine, carrying with her the satisfaction of a promise kept. Behind her, Riley Thornton continued to serve, and the cycle continued. One choice at a time, one person at a time, one legacy at a time. That was what it meant to be a leader. That was what it meant to be worthy. And that was how broken people learned to become whole again. The end.